Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Casual Sports Podcast. It's just me today, Alec Caberna, taking it. Also today, Matt's at work, Mike's at work, so I'm taking over on this one. Hope you all are having a fantastic week. Got over the hump. It's Thursday. Yes, it's Thursday. Had to think there for a second. We got all sorts of action going on the network tonight and throughout this weekend. Of course, high school volleyball in action tonight and high school football taken over tomorrow night. It'll be taken over the Casual Sports Podcast show tomorrow as well. We'll be getting into all that and more. Today, final day of the week, we're keeping it national here on the Casual Sports Podcast, though, as there's a list I want to kind of talk about going into this NFL season that I was putting out there, kind of thinking about throughout the morning. And there's two lists you always see: top 10 quarterbacks, top 10 running backs going into the NFL season. It always gets a lot of fun discussions out of it. So I figured, hey, man, this ain't a bad spot to, look at that. Got solo. I'm going to go ahead and, try it out. We'll see how this works out for me. So if you want to see the full list in their entirety, you can head over to my Twitter at the moment right now, at Alec Coburn. I've got them all tweeted out there. But I'm going to go down it, break it down here on this show, because I think there's a couple of them that might have some surprises in there. So we're going to start out with the top 10 quarterbacks going into the 2022 season. At number 10 on this list, I have Derek Carr. Now, while he's not always statistically the best quarterback, I think it's kind of undoubtable when you look at him. He's just so successful. And, finishing fifth place in passing last year, only 23 touchdowns and 14 interceptions, wasn't great with his quarterback rating. And his completion percentage, it was pretty good, but 2% below the top in the league last year. He's just one of those guys, though, when you look at the NFL, if you're going to build a team around someone, if you can't afford one of those big names, you're going with Derek Carr. So when I see that, when I see how much teams can work around this guy, even when, they don't have a ton of talent. I mean, you look at this Raiders team the last couple of years, they've been beat up. They've gone through 1,000 waves of controversy, and yet Derek Carr is still there leading the team, and he does it quietly. He does this in a way that it doesn't draw attention to himself, but everybody knows who Derek Carr is, and he's just been one of those very consistent quarterbacks. Injuries have hurt him a little bit along the way. He'd probably find himself higher up on this list if he hadn't had, some key injuries in his career. He probably had a chance at a Super Bowl appearance at least once or twice in his career that have, been derailed by either, Josh Jacobs, his running back, getting injured, his head coach staff falling apart, and players getting arrested and sentenced to long times in prison. But he's just one of those guys, man. He has been so consistent throughout his career. It's hard to say going into this year, he's not going to do it again with this Raiders team. They're so talented, and now he's got some serious weapons. At number 9, this one's going to please Mike Wolfgang. His boy, Dak Prescott, I have at number 9 on the list. He's had a couple injuries throughout the years, but overall, when you just look at the way quarterbacks perform these days, he's just up there with the best of them. And when he's healthy, I mean, we've seen it a couple times. When he's truly healthy and the guys around him are healthy, he's unstoppable. So he had one of the best quarterback ratings of the last couple of years, throughout the last couple of years, I should say. And I think when you look at him and what he brings to the table, I think he's just one of those really talented quarterbacks. Had the third highest quarterback rating last season behind the likes of Aaron Rodgers and Joe Burrow, who are higher up on this list. So I think Dak Prescott really just one of those guys that he's in the running this season to, take a team to the Super Bowl. We'll see if the Cowboys can do it or if they'll choke again in the postseason like we always see. But they're in a good spot right now with him at the helm. And if it wasn't for Dak Prescott, I don't know if this is a team that would be. I mean, if they had a guy at the helm, even like Kyler Murray, who's only a couple down on where I would have on this list, probably just above in the top 15, just on that outside of this top 10, I would probably put this same Cowboys team 3 extra losses if it's not Dak Prescott at the helm. So number 8, and I think this is that first controversial one, Patrick Mahomes. And I'm only throwing Mahomes this far down because I know his stats have been really great and he's there, but his quarterback rating's been down. His interceptions have gone up. He's starting to lose talent around him, which isn't helping him out either. I think he saw it last season. Defenses started picking him apart. He wasn't that same strong, consistent quarterback that we've seen out of him in the first few years of his careers. Now, being a top 10 quarterback in the league is still a really great spot. Putting him at number 8 in the league, that's a place you want to be. But I think a lot of people would go, oh, Mahomes, he's a top 5 quarterback in the league. I don't know anymore. I mean, I think you look at him and part of it is the fact that guys around him are, slipping up. They're not having as much production. And this was his past season was yards wise his best season since his sophomore campaign. But interceptions, the most he's ever thrown in the worst quarterback rating he's had since his rookie year, in which he barely had any playing time. So I think there was a huge regression from last year. I mean, yardage went up, touchdowns stayed the same, but interceptions doubled for him. So he's going to be a top 10 quarterback as long as he plays in the NFL and continues to play this way. But I don't think I can warrant a top 5 production out of Patrick Mahomes anymore. He's good. He's been in a lot of, deep playoff runs, but can he win it all? I mean, he's only done it the one time. So I don't, he's a really good quarterback, but I just don't see him as being any higher than number 8. Number 7, he won the Super Bowl last year at quarterback, so it was hard for me to push him down any farther. But it's Matthew Stafford, 4,800 yards for him last season, closing in on 4,900. Completion percentage of 67.2%, decently high, not as high as Dak Prescott. Had 41 touchdowns, which was among the best in the NFL last year. Second place overall, just behind Tom Brady. The one knock I had against him, though, 17 interceptions. And I want to blame part of that on the fact that he switched teams and, kind of got thrown into the fire, you would say. But the other part of it, his stats were so good. He didn't always have the best passes, but he had a really awesome wide receiver core. He's still got a pretty good one this year. So I think when you return all the talent he has, he's going to be a good quarterback this year. But just based on true quarterback test here, who's the best quarterback? I don't think he is. I think he just was on the best team. That's why they won the Super Bowl, because the best quarterback isn't always on the best team. He got sacked 30 times, which was a lot better than some quarterbacks, and like Joe Burrow, who was sacked 51 times last year, which is just impeccable. To see Matt Ryan with the Falcons sacked 40 times, having that 30, a little on the high side, but I mean, all in all, it was a pretty good season for the Rams, and I'm sure Stafford will take 30 sacks if he can walk out Super Bowl champion at the end of the year. So that's where I put Stafford on this list. Number 6, and this one's maybe a little farther back than I think I thought I was going to have him at, but when I was breaking down this list, the one part that's bothering me here is the accomplishments just aren't there. Josh Allen, he's still a really young guy. Matt's going to like that he is on this list, might not like that he's that high, or not that high on the list, because I only have him at number 6 going into this season. I do think he's a really talented quarterback, but there was a production fall off from 2020 to 2021. Less yardage, less touchdowns, and 5 more interceptions. So he's a guy I think is going to be just fine. He's going to be, billed as a top 5 quarterback probably for, the next couple of years of his career. But the jumps in production we saw from year 1 to year 2 to year 3 was so astronomical that any step back at this point looked bad on it, because he threw for 1,000 more yards than he did in 2018 than 2019. So he went from 2,000 yards in his first season to 3,000 yards in his second season. Touchdown and interception ratio first to second year went from 1-1 to 2-1. So a lot better there, through 20 touchdowns. Year 3, he goes for 4,500 yards, which was about 1,500 more than his prior year. And he throws 37 touchdowns, 17 more touchdowns, and only 1 interception. And then you see this big kind of step back, 137 less yards. Keep in mind, this is also in 1 less game. He started 16 games in those prior 2. Now he's playing an extra game, had less yards, less touchdowns, more interceptions. So there was parts of it. It was just kind of that regression step from Josh Allen going into year 4. I think he's a really talented guy. I think he's going to get his footing back this year, but I think there do remain, some question marks on can he get back to that year 3 production and playing an extra game. He really should be. I think he's a really talented guy. Putting up here at number 6, I really like what he's shown out so far in his young career. But heading into the top 5, at number 5, I got Justin Herbert. He's a guy that I think, especially as he continues to develop with especially the wonderful weapons he has around him, he is going to be one of those guys we talk about. I mean, came out rookie year, put up Josh Allen's MVP numbers from his 3rd season. 4,300 yards, 31 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions, which wasn't far off from what I was just saying that Josh Allen had in his 3rd year before he did take a step back. Now, Josh Allen, had better yardage this year in 2021 than that 2020 line for Justin Herbert, but Herbert came out and threw for 5,000 yards. One of 2 guys in the NFL this year who threw for 5,000 or more yards. It was him and Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback of all time. He's put himself in pretty good company in just his 2nd year. So I think a lot of people expect big things. 38 touchdowns for him, which, again, I think put him 3rd in the NFL. That's an amazing spot to be in. This is a kid that I think you really have to continue to look at and continue to push because he is so talented from his time in Oregon. And, I think a lot of people kind of question when he came out of the NFL, what's this guy with the long hair, played for Oregon, who doesn't really put the best guys out there sometimes, really going to do anything? I think he's answered that with the standing ovation. He has been just phenomenal. And last year, I mean, you're seeing it turn in. He's making guys look like top guys, even if they aren't. I mean, you're talking about in the running back room with, I believe it's Keenan Allen, looking like a top 10 back. Is he a top 10 back? Maybe, maybe not. But with the way that Justin Herbert can control this offense, they're so dynamic that it allows a guy like Keenan Allen to really, I think, maybe play above his pedigree. So it's not just Herbert that looks great. It's the fact he's making the entire team look great. Number 4 on the list, I think this one will get me some hate, but I got Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson at number 4. Look what he did last season. He was the only guy on that team that didn't go down. They had like 60-plus guys out throughout the entire season. It was the most guys ever put on an injured reserve by one team. So to see what Lamar Jackson did last year, and, he's still in his first 5 years in the league, and he finds himself already with an MVP. The only thing you can knock on Lamar Jackson to this point in his career is the fact that he can't win playoff games. But is that on him? It's on the fact that the Ravens really haven't had great defenses over, the last couple of seasons. I don't know where you want to put it. Yeah, he doesn't win games, but just look at what this guy did last year with absolutely no talent around him. As a starter in the 12 games he did play, because he was out for a little bit, but he played majority of them. 7-5 with absolutely no one around him. Kept his completion percentage identical to last year. More yardage, less touchdowns, but like I said, there was nobody out there to give it to. More interceptions, but it's, again, the complete lack of guys around him. It did really hurt and, hurt any sort of stats that you could look at from last year. Running-wise, kind of the same thing, 300 less yards, but this is one of those guys maybe the stats don't love after, this past season, but he won the division with no offense, or nearly won it. Only lost to a team that was in the Super Bowl. I don't think that's too bad. And he's one of those guys stats don't like, but the eye test, you just can't help but kind of look at him when he plays the game, and you're just mesmerized by the way he controls things. We haven't seen a player as dynamic as him since really Michael Vick in the early 2000s. That's the last guy you kind of looked at and you knew every time he touched the ball something special was happening. That's what we're having with Lamar Jackson. It's really fun to watch, and if you haven't seen it, you have to find a way to, because he's such a talented guy out there. That's why I had him at number 4. Statistically, he's probably down an 8 or 9 on the list, like maybe farther down. But the eye test is really one of the reasons why I had him up this high at number 4. Number 3, I'm going to sound like kind of a homer for this one of taking the in-state guy. But after last season, I mean, I've been very critical on him, but at the same time, he's been phenomenal. It's Joe Burrow. You look at Joe Burrow last season, and he was the most accurate quarterback in the league completion percentage, second in QBR. He was high on the interceptions, but then he's also highest yards per attempt. And when you look at quarterbacks, and I love efficiency, when you need to be able to run an efficient offense, and when you're averaging almost 9 yards per attempt, not per reception, per attempt, that's insane. Tom Brady, 7.4 yards per attempt. Stafford, who won a Super Bowl, 8.1. Joe Burrow was 9 yards per attempt. If you start going down and you're pushing that into yards per completion, it gets nearly doubled. This is one of those guys, a generational talent that, like I said, was really in his true first year last year, since he wasn't injured for the first time, since he tore his ACL the first year, came back and put up these numbers, was sixth in passing yards, was, top 12, I think it was, in touchdowns. His interceptions were at 14, but it seemed like a high interception year for most quarterbacks. Not a lot of guys kept it low, which is what led to, Aaron Rodgers winning the MVP. He only had 4 interceptions to 37 touchdowns, despite the fact he had over 1,000 less yards than Tom Brady, who arguably had his best career in his 44th year of age. So, but you look at Joe Burrow, and he was throwing for first downs 38.8% of the time, which is one of the highest marks, sitting behind Mahomes, who was at 39.5%, and tied with Matt Stafford, that was 38.5%. Aaron Rodgers led the class with 40.1% of the time he was throwing for first downs. This is just a really impressive quarterback. You look at him, and you can find his name at the top of just about any statistical category in that last season. I think he's really in the market to make that biggest step going into what'll be his third year. If you don't see Joe Burrow as a guy that can potentially, win a Super Bowl again this year, get back there and win it this time around, and you don't see him as a guy that can go out there and win games, I don't know what we're seeing differently. I'd love to talk to you, because I know people want to go, oh man, but he has such a great team around him, wide receiver wise, but he was also sacked more times than anybody last season. Closest one to him was Ryan Tannehill, who had 4 less sacks. Zach Wilson had 7 less sacks. Baker Mayfield, 8 less sacks. Derek Carr, 11 less sacks. Nobody was sacked anywhere close to as much as Joe Burrow. Zach Wilson, though, was sacked for as many yards, if that tells you how far back he had to run just to try and give himself some room. But I think you really look at this quarterback class, and Joe Burrow, at the moment, it looks like he's primed to kind of take over as the next guy in the league. I think him and Justin Herbert, who I have had both in this top 5, those are the future of this league, and I think they're both in it well. So now it comes down to the top 2. And you could flip this either way, but I put going into the season Aaron Rodgers. And I know I don't really have confidence in the offense they have this year, but anytime you have Aaron Rodgers, you have a chance to put up a great regular season. No, he's not the best in the postseason, but I'm looking at just best quarterbacks overall. And when I see best quarterbacks, and you have a guy that's won the MVP back-to-back years, how can you not throw him in that conversation for the best guy, especially when he had only 6 less touchdowns than Tom Brady, but 8 less interceptions? Quarterback rating was higher. He was throwing it for the most first downs percentage-wise. Percentage-wise, 40.1% of his throws ended up as first downs. Aaron Rodgers at yards per attempt, 7.8, which was one of the highest marks behind Joe Burrow last year. Aaron Rodgers, he passes every eye test when you see the way he plays, and the third most accurate quarterback based off of completion percentages as well. He was great in every category, best quarterback rating last year. And that's why he took home the MVP. When you look around at him and you see, we talked about them losing Davante Adams, and now he has no weapons. They only had Davante Adams last year. I think that's one sign you got to look at. Yeah, they lost their only wide receiver, and everyone's going, oh, well, now he has nothing. He barely had, he had one of the best wide receivers, yes, and now that he's gone, people completely forget. But Davante Adams didn't have 4,000 yards receiving last year. There was a whole team making catches for this team. I know he had 1,500, which was phenomenal, and Derek Carr is going to love that weapon. But you look at a guy in Aaron Rodgers throughout his career has really learned to spread the ball around. He's on a team that has never drafted a wide receiver for him, that they have never helped, or at least an early, pick on a wide receiver. They've never tried to grab him a top talent because they haven't needed to. He is that good. And I think he's proved it these last 2 years. I don't think you really have to go out here and really push that Aaron Rodgers is one of the two best quarterbacks in the NFL. And I think he will be until he retires, unless he completely falls off, which could happen. If this ends up being his last year, he could have huge regression, but I think he's going to be just fine. And that leaves number one on the list. If you haven't guessed it already, I don't know what you're waiting for. It's Tom Brady. Tom Brady, at age 44, put up what might have been his best season in his entire career. And that's terrifying, because last year he threw for 700 more yards than he did in the prior season, 3 more touchdowns, and kept the same amount of interceptions while going higher on completion percentage, 67.5% completion, which was an increase from the prior season. He has increased his stats in every category over the last 3 seasons. And he's one of the oldest players to do it. When you talk about Tom Brady, he kind of pulled everybody over and went, oh, man, I'm retiring. No, I'm not. Haha, screw you. But when he came back, and he's doing it better than ever, his 67.5% completion was the second highest it has ever been in his career. You had to go back to 2007 when he went for 68.9%, 4,800 yards, 50 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions in what was arguably his best season ever. Another one on that list would be the 2011 Patriots team he was on. That's the only time he's had more yardage or anywhere close to as many yards as he did in this last season. 2011, he had 5,235 yards, 65.5% completion, 39 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. Every stat was better this past season for Tom Brady. And I know a lot of people will try and push this agenda that, he's been assistant quarterback his whole career. He's out of that system, and he's better. Can you imagine what this system quarterback could have been doing over the last 20 years of his career if he was playing in a non-system? If he was playing in this Buccaneer system, I'll say, the last 20 years, 7 Super Bowls might look like nothing. Because we've seen Tom Brady in 2 seasons at 43 and 44 years old look better than every single other quarterback in the league. So Tom Brady, number 1 quarterback going into the season. Aaron Rodgers 2nd, Burrow 3rd, Jackson 4, Herbert 5, Allen at 6, Stafford 7, Mahomes 8, and Dak Prescott 9, with Derek Carr rounding out that list. So now I'm going to flip it over to the running backs, because I think this might be a more competitive room, because I think there's so many guys that fly into this list either under the radar, or, you forget about them, or somehow statistically, you don't ever hear them, but they're one of the best guys out there. So I was going into this one, number 1 guy on the list, Derrick Henry. I know he only played 8 games last year, but I think you can pretty much go around to anybody, anywhere, and go, if I'm building a team, what running back do you want? Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb, good picks. But Derrick Henry, we haven't seen anyone dominate like he did for a long time. He has been unbelievable. And maybe this injury is going to cause some regression for him. I don't know. But for having only 8 games of play, getting 10 touchdowns on the ground. Then you look at Jonathan Taylor, who played 17 games, 332 attempts, which was 113 attempts more than Derrick Henry. Only had 8 more rushing touchdowns. He did have 2 more receiving touchdowns. So he does have, on the season, 20 touchdowns compared to Derrick Henry's 10. Derrick Henry played in half the game, so that does add up. And rushing yards per game, Derrick Henry led the entire NFL last year at 117.1 yards per game. he is a beast. And Derrick Henry, until really proven otherwise, is the best running back in the NFL. He's one of those guys that when he was playing and he was playing great, Tennessee was looked at as a Super Bowl favorite to get there. As soon as he went down, they were having questions on whether or not they would make the playoffs. You don't see that from many other guys in the league. And when you completely talk about from Super Bowl to not even in the playoffs, that is the impact that Derrick Henry has on a team. Jonathan Taylor, yeah, put up a lot of yards for the Colts. How did they do in the playoffs? Was anybody talking about him to win anything? Stats are nice. Wins count. And that's really the only reason I don't have Jonathan Taylor there is because the impact. If you're ever talking MVP running back wise, it's Derrick Henry. Most valuable running back in the league by far. Jonathan Taylor makes the Colts look fun. He's flashy. He gets the touchdowns, but they don't win. And, blame that on what they got around him. This Titans team has had plenty. Really good defenses. Some really good wide receivers. I mean, between A.J. Brown, they've had Julio. They've had, a good slew of tight ends getting thrown in that mix, but it's always been Derrick Henry. This team goes as Derrick Henry goes. Number 2 on the list, I do have Jonathan Taylor, though. Don't worry. He's not getting pushed far down on this one. I mean, he had almost 600 more yards than anybody else in the league. Led the NFL in total touchdowns last year with 20. Averaged 9 yards per reception, by the way, when getting the ball thrown to him out of the backfield. And on the ground, 5.5 yards per carry, which was number 1 in terms of running backs in the last season. So he led rushing yards, was in the top of receiving touchdowns for running backs. Everything was pretty much in his favor. He was top 5 in, average yards per catch and most touchdowns. Yards per game, he was second. Yards per carry, like I said, he led the NFL in it. He also led in attempts. So I'm going to knock somebody a little bit later down here for having a lot of attempts and not having the touchdowns. Jonathan Taylor gets this because he scores. And what's the only thing that matters in a game besides winning it? Scoring the football. He does that really freaking well. Number 3 on the list. Don't want to sound like too much of a homer, but I think you look statistically last season, it's hard not to push him. Nick Chubb, 5.5 yards per carry, 9 touchdowns in total in the season. That's kind of the one knock against him. And I blame that on Stefanski. You look at his play calling last year, especially as a Browns fan. I'm going to, take this apart a little bit more. But when you had a guy going 5.5 yards per carry, and it seems you just forgot to use him and instead had an injured Baker Mayfield throwing the football, rolling out to the left when he couldn't throw to the left because he was injured, and then you trade him because he was injured and couldn't throw the football, and they had him out there playing anyway. It does start to hurt you a little bit. But I think when you look at top 3 backs in the league, it's Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb, and I think there is some freedom to rotate. But I think after last year, what we saw, I think that's probably the best way to put it. And number 4, I would say just on the outside of those 3 guys, it's Joe Mixon. 16 total touchdowns last year, 4.1 yards per carry. But I want to knock him for the yards per carry, but the efficiency-wise of getting into the end zone, 13 touchdowns, you have to like it back that way. If you can maintain a short yards per carry, but you can still find a way to score a lot of points for your team, then, I didn't quite knock it as much. And I guess we'll push this one out here. Nacho Harris is the other guy on this list that I didn't put in there, despite the fact he was 4th in rushing yards last year. 3.9 yards per carry, to me, was not a high-quality running back. So that was the one knock I had against him. Actually, I think I had a couple others here. Let me pull up my list I got going on. Nacho Harris, 4th in rushing, but 14th in touchdowns and 20th in yards per carry for running backs last season. He's a high-caliber running back, but I'd probably put him around 15th in the league, despite the fact he goes for a lot of yards. But if you give a lot of the guys the carries he had last season, 307 attempts, he would have been blown out of the water. Nick Chubb had 228 attempts. 80 less almost. And he still put up 59 more yards on 80 less attempts. That's one of the problems I have with Najee Harris. I know a lot of Steelers fans won't like me for that, but I just need to see him be more than a 3-yard running back. You have to break him off big. You have to find ways to at least push that number up to 4.3, 4.2 is where I want to see Najee Harris this season. Until he does that, I don't think he's a top 10 guy in the league yet. I think he's getting there. I think he's a good running back. 10 total touchdowns last year, just 7 of them on the ground. They used him more out of the backfield, to catch the football a lot more than a lot of other running backs. I liked what I saw out of him, and I think he's going to turn into something big for this team. But at the moment, I don't think he's there quite yet. Number 5 on the list, and he's a guy I don't think I ever think of, but very efficient, and it's Damien Harris, the running back that helped out in a huge way for Mac Jones last season. Out of New England, only 202 attempts. He is the only guy that's very high, that's on this list, that was that short in carries without there being any injury problems. And yet he averaged 4.6 yards per carry and came out second most in rushing touchdowns with 15 in 15 games. 1 touchdown a game. Anybody else in the league do that? Couple. Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor. Oh, well, there's the end of the list. Only 3 guys averaged 1 touchdown per game rushing the football. And he's one of them. 4.6 yards per carry. If you were to give him the league average for these top running backs around 250, if you were to give him 48 more attempts, his numbers are up there. They go from 929 to being, just around the likes of Najee Harris. Top 5 guy in the league. And that's why I have him as this top 5 running back. If the Patriots this year, with Bill Belichick running the system, decide to run the football a lot, Damien Harris's numbers are going to skyrocket. And I'm here for it. Number 6 on this list, and I have him here because he's such a dual threat guy. Austin Eckler. He tied Jonathan Taylor for total touchdowns. He only had 12 rushing touchdowns. Jonathan Taylor had 18. Austin Eckler was the second best wide receiver for the Chargers last season in terms of touchdowns receiving. He had 8 receiving touchdowns for the Chargers last year, which was just behind Mike Williams, who I think had 10 or 12, but ahead of Keenan Allen. Austin Eckler on the ground, 911 yards, 4.4 yards per carry, and the only knock against him, pretty much the exact same one as Damien Harris, he only had 206 attempts. He's such a dual-purpose guy. Led running backs in receiving yards with 647. That's a pretty good year for most wide receivers that aren't number 1 or number 2 on the team. You got a number 3 wide receiver that goes for 647. They're probably going to be on the roster a couple more seasons. And he put 647 on the ground with 647 through the air to 911 on the ground. Austin Eckler is just a beast all around. Number 7 on the list. He didn't score the ball well, and that's why I have him farther down, because I think he's probably a top three guy in most seasons. But after last year, there was a regression with him. Only 6 touchdowns in total, but he was 5th in rushing yards. 4.7 yards per carry was one of the highest marks we saw out of a running back last season. In fact, it was, only sitting behind Jonathan Taylor and Nick Chubb. And yet, he only gets the 6 touchdowns. That's the one knock I have against him, because he was up there, I believe, 3rd in rushing yards per game last season. He's a guy you want on your team. And frankly, to me, he's half the reason why the Vikings are ever relevant. It's because Dalvin Cook goes big. No one's talking about the Vikings in a great way because of Kirk Cousins. They're going, oh, what's Kirk Cousins going to do tonight? People are going, what's Dalvin Cook going to do tonight? That's what everybody talks about. No one's going out there, in fantasy football and taking Kirk Cousins because they want to. It's because he's the only quarterback left on the board after the draft, and they forgot to take one. So, Dalvin Cook, the reason they're relevant. Number 8 on the list, I was kind of surprised when I put this together that he was even on here because I thought he would have had a bigger fall off than he did. But Ezekiel Elliott. And I have him on this list because he was the last guy that was at 1,000 yards. There's some guys above him that do, but 12 total touchdowns for him, 4.2 yards per carry. And he's doing this while splitting reps in the backfield with Tony Pollard, a really talented back. But the fact that you look at numbers from last season and Tony Pollard wasn't among the best in the league, despite the fact I think a lot of people will look and go, man, that Tony Pollard's really good. And he is. He went for 719 yards, 5.5 yards per carry on 130 attempts. Can you imagine if he went up there and got 332 attempts? He would have had the exact same amount of yards as Jonathan Taylor. But you look at Zeke Elliott and the fact that he's getting less yards per carries, but he's getting it into the end zone more. They're using him in that red zone situation, and he's still getting 1,000 yards splitting the backfield. You look at the other guys on the list ahead of him. Jonathan Taylor? No, that was all him. Nick Chubb? Yeah, he split with Kareem Hunt for part of the season. I think Kareem went down with an injury last year. Joe Mixon? Alone. Nacho Harris? Most of it he was alone. He did split a little bit. Dalvin Cook? Pretty much by himself. Antonio Gibson? Mostly by himself. Zeke Elliott, the last 1,000-yard back, went with 2 guys that split a backfield and still went for over 1,000 yards. That's why Zeke Elliott's on this list. Because of the fact that he can still dominate despite splitting carries. Number 9 on the list is a guy I didn't even think was going to be on here until I was breaking down some stats, and I went, man, I forgot about this guy. James Robinson. And I know he's not always the best, but when he's healthy, he's really, really freaking good. And he's one of those guys that tore his Achilles last year. He played 14 games, only got 164 attempts, 4.7 yards per carry, and had 8 touchdowns. But if they were a good team last year and they had ever given him the football like he should have, he would have been 1,000-yard back like that. He would have been 12, 13, 14 touchdowns just like that. Coming into this year, with the way it feels like Jacksonville's retooling this offense and reorganizing things, I think he's going to be splitting the backfield with ETN, but he's going to have those big games. He's going to have those moments where he gets back to that 1,000-yard season he had in the last full season of being healthy. He's a really talented running back, and he hasn't been used in the right way, especially last season, but I think he's really talented. Number 10 on this list is a guy I really like, and I know a lot of people kind of see him as an overrated back. I got the stats to prove you wrong. Devin Singletary out of Buffalo. Matt will like that one because last season, 188 carries, but 4.6 yards per carry. Same boat as James Robinson. If they were getting 225 or 250 or 265, Singletary won't get that because he's playing with Josh Allen, who will obviously, run the ball himself. He had 763 yards on his own last year, nearly matching what Devin Singletary did. But if they were to ever need to go to a running back ground game, Devin Singletary's there. 4.6 yards per carry, 870 yards per game. With that 4.6 yards per carry, you give him 202 carries instead of the 108, just increasing it by, a handful of carries. He goes from having 870 yards to 929. You keep pushing that up just a little bit more here and there. And you're looking at a guy that if you gave him 250 carries, he's at a 1,100 yard season. And last season, 7 touchdowns for him. 7 touchdowns. That's the same amount Najee Harris had. And Najee Harris did that in over 100 more carries, had the same amount of touchdowns as Devin Singletary last year. That's why I have Singletary on this list and not Najee Harris. I like Najee, like I said, but I also got to say he's not on the list, but I think right outside number 11, Antonio Gibson from Washington. I really like the way he's developed and the direction they're going in. With Carson Wentz out there this year, I think they're going to be a good team on the ground. So I think that's the direction they're going to push, and I think Gibson could go big this year too. So let's switch gears here for the rest of the show. Head over Major League Baseball, closing in on the end of the month. So we're going to go ahead and hit that one of those final check-ins before September call-ups. We'll probably talk a little bit more baseball to start the week. Next week, we'll see how much time we have on each day. But Yankees, man, they've hit a big skid and bad timing on it. Luckily, they had an absolutely astronomically large lead. That lead is trimming down, and they have won their last 3, which has helped them kind of force that lead back to into a solid spot. But Tampa Bay and Toronto are closing in quickly. Tampa Bay, 7.5 games back. Toronto, 8 games back. And to see both of those teams coming in real close now, Tampa looks like the better team right now, especially because they have a much better pitching department. But Toronto can hit the ball with the best of them, and you need that come postseason. You need runs scored. Pitching definitely wins you the games, but you can't win them if you can't hit. And I think that might come back and hurt Tampa Bay in the playoffs, because you look at them, 512 runs scored, and you compare that around the best teams, they're really in the bottom half of the best teams in baseball when it comes to that department. Now, they're 465 runs against, puts them, I think, in the top 5 in the league right now, maybe top 3 in that area. But both these teams are coming in. They're coming in hot. And if the Yankees continue to stutter through September to finish out this season, AL East could be a very exciting race to the finish line. It's close. We're getting very close because New York can, clinch this in a matter of weeks. I mean, if they have a good 2 weeks, they probably solidify themselves as the number 1 seed, or as, the winner of the division, I should say. In the AL Central, man, Cleveland has separated themselves. 4-game lead now on the Minnesota Twins, who have lost 5 straight. Cleveland, hitting-wise, 531 runs scored. More runs scored than that Tampa Bay team, more runs than Seattle. And while it does need to be a lot better, and only that 531 I think is going to hurt in postseason, I think it really will hurt them in the postseason. And I don't know if they're going to be able to keep up offensively with a lot of these teams they'll have to go up against, especially in a wild card scenario. I think I'd be kind of hoping for Seattle potentially to play here. So we have a new format this year. I think that'll make Cleveland be the team to play, because I don't think they're going to be catching up to the Yankees, who are currently the number 2 seed, considering we're 10 games back. Not sure they're going to catch up and overtake them. I think 1 and 2 seeds get the bye week 1. 3 has to play one of the wild cards teams. The other 2 wild card teams play against one another. Each of those 3-game series, I believe, is what it is going into this season. So Minnesota, they're also kind of falling out of a wild card spot as well. When you look at them, they're 62 and 60, 5 games back, or 4 games back from a wild card spot with Seattle. And the wild card spot's basically the same record as Cleveland, who would be leading the division. So they're going to need a big turnaround. Chicago's still in the mix, but I don't look at them as a team that can make that run. They've been better on the road than they have been at home, not by much. They can't beat teams over 500, and their run differential is negative 31. They've only scored 521 runs, and they've allowed 552 runs against them, which is really bad. Really, really bad. So I don't see Chicago making the run. Kansas, Detroit, they're both more than 15 games back at this point. It's not really reasonable to come back from. If it was within 10, maybe. Same reason why I don't think Baltimore or Boston can make that final push. Baltimore is only 11.5 games back. They have a pretty good pitching staff, and they can hit it decently well, but they're not going to overtake the 3 teams ahead of them. If they were going to, I think they would have done it already. I think it's been a successful season, though, for Baltimore, all in all. Into the AL West, it seems about a lock that Houston is going to win this thing. I think we've known that for a while, probably since the beginning of the season, that was going to happen. But I think it's just about solidified now. They've been amazing against teams over 500. They've been good on the road. They've been phenomenal at home. They haven't even lost 20 games at road this year or at home this season. They've won more than twice as many games at home than they have on the road. Their hitting is amazing. 574 runs scored, among one of the best. And pitching, 419 runs against. Only the Dodgers is better than that, because the Dodgers are at 389. Houston's your favorite yet again to come out of the American League. I hate to break the deal because I don't want it to happen. Seattle, they're 67-57 right now. Great spot to be in because the Rangers aren't coming, the Angels aren't coming, and Oakland's not coming for them. Seattle can sit in this second spot and ride it. The only problem is a team like Tampa or Toronto could steal it, or even a team like Minnesota. Seattle's not guaranteed that spot in the wild card just because they finished second. And it really feels like Minnesota and Seattle could kind of end up bouncing each other out. I think you're probably a good chance of seeing 3 AL East teams into the postseason this year. I think there's a good likelihood, but Seattle, I'd hate to see it this year if they don't get it. Such a long time for them to get to a situation like this, and they're so close, but it feels like yet so far for this team. They have one more month of baseball, and they have to hold on to this final wild card spot to finally snap the streak that they have been on for 20 years, to finally get back to the postseason. It's going to be fun. But Houston is dogging the rest of the dogging the rest of the American League at this point. Yankees looked like they were going to be the team that was just going to completely pull away. But all of the same problems we've seen from the last couple of years that we always talked about, they're too home run heavy. If they stop hitting home runs, they can't win games. Their pitching staff's falling apart. They can't seem to close games. Everything we've said about this Yankees team over the last 3-4 seasons, it's all coming back. And it's not a good thing. And they're falling off. And it's a really bad time for it. And that's allowed Houston to absolutely seize the American League by the heart. And right now they're just squeezing. They're squeezing. They're ready just to pop and make it back yet again to another World Series. Houston has created, whether any of us like it or not, a dynasty in the American League. They dominated the American League. And, while they only have one World Series in that time, they've been there so much. And they're always right there. Always a team you got to watch out for. Into the National League with the Mets. They've been kind of sluggish in their last 10. And that's allowed the Braves just to start punching in. They are closing in. I wish Matt was here to talk about it, because Atlanta, they're 10. Hold on. The Atlanta Braves are basically guaranteed a playoff spot at this point. They don't need to push it. But at the moment, they're only a wild card team. And, well, I don't think they can, push that far ahead and take a great spot in the playoffs. I mean, it'd be kind of hard to see the Mets completely giving this up at the end of the season, but Atlanta's right there, and they can make a push. They're another team that's been really good at home, really good on the road. The only knock against Atlanta this year, they've sucked against solid competition, 26-28 against teams over 500. And when they're going up against teams like, Miami or Washington or Chicago or Cincinnati or Pittsburgh, they're going to win them, and that's why their record's been inflated. But as soon as they start going up again against Philadelphia, against St. Louis, against the Mets, against the Dodgers, against San Diego, those numbers fall back off. That's the one concern I have with Atlanta. They made a really great run, and they're turning that around a little bit. They're changing that up because they're taking on St. Louis right now, and I believe they're winning. Let me check that real quick. Are they winning? Nope, Pardon me, they're not taking on St. Louis. Apparently, I can't read. They take on St. Louis tomorrow. That's what it is. Nice. But I'm concerned. I don't know if they're going to be able to keep this up. They've had a really good pitching, a really good hitting. 622 runs scored is, I believe, only behind the Dodgers. They're ahead of the Yankees at this point in runs scored. But sometimes it feels like they have those really big games one day, and then, they'll go out there and lose 20-10 the next. So inconsistent a little bit with this Atlanta team, but trending in the right direction, and they've pretty much got a wild card spot locked. St. Louis in the NL Central has done an outstanding job. I think there was a period in time we were all kind of counting this team to a wild card spot. Milwaukee looked like they were locking things up. Milwaukee, since the start of August, has gone. They haven't looked good. They're now 65-58, just barely ahead over 500. There's a team in the last month that has struggled in a big way, and you look at why that is. Well, they've been on the road a lot. They're a 34-34 team on the road. Well, they've also gone up against teams over 500. They're only 30-28 against teams over 500. That is such an important stat when you talk postseason, because you can win a lot of games against, the lower half of your league. But can you win the big ones? And only so many teams can. And those teams that can are the ones that make it into October baseball and make those deep runs into the World Series. At this point, I don't think Milwaukee can. I don't even know if St. Louis can. They've had a really good bats offensively. 601 runs scored, 486 against. Great pitching. Really, really great pitching in that department. But you're not winning the big games, and they need to find ways to beat teams over 500. Into the NL West, LA Dodgers have pretty much sealed their fate as the top team in the National League with a month to go in baseball. Almost a 20-game lead over San Diego, who is starting to slip a little bit. They're looking good. Probably a pretty good team right now to, punch your ticket on taking a wild card spot. They just need kind of one more nice run. But the NL West was looking very competitive at the beginning of the year, and for a good portion of it up until that All-Star break, Dodgers just took off, and everybody else slowed down, fell behind. And right now, National League, we'll make our predictions at the end of the season, but I think you're going to be hard-pressed to not say the Dodgers are going to take it all this year. I don't like saying that. I don't like the Dodgers. I don't want to see them win. My neighbor is a huge Dodgers fan, and I don't want to see her happy about it. I want to see Cleveland take home that title, and then I want to rub that in her face. Because she's thrown a couple of the Dodgers World Series at me, so I got to throw it back. But Dodgers team, man, plus 275 in that run differential. That's insane. 275 in the game, and the season's not over. That's already more than they had last season. They had a differential of plus 269, which was the best in the 2021 season. In 2022, the highest mark was plus 136 in the short season, also the Dodgers. 2019, Major League Baseball, highest margin, 280 went to Houston. Second was 273 with the Dodgers. They are on track right now to just completely blow away the rest of baseball yet again in runs scored. And a big part of it, yeah, they do lead in runs scored, but they're also the best team in runs allowed. The only three statistics that matter in runs scored, number one. Runs allowed, number one. Wins, number one. The Dodgers are the best team in baseball, and it's not even close. It's insane how far they're pulling away right now. It looked like we were setting up for a Dodgers-Yankees World Series. We might be getting another Dodgers-Astros. That's the way things are turning out right now. It's looking like it's going to go that way, unless we have another team like the Braves actually pull one out of nowhere. I'm hoping it's this team that I'm wearing right here on my shirt. I'd like to see that. Well, here on the Thursday, let's wrap things up. A little NBA discussion as we have heartbreaking news, man. Oklahoma City's number 2 pick in Chet Holmgren, the unicorn out of Gonzaga, is out for the season after injuring his foot. And he got the Liz Frank injury, and I believe they said his left foot. And it sucks to hear because I think so many people, including myself, were really interested to see how this guy performed at the next level. And he could be at this point with an injury before the season even starts, looking like a Zion Williamson career to what we've seen so far, where you've seen a big injury kind of derail the start. Then he finally gets in there and he gets injured again. And you keep coming back, all the fanfare, all the excitement, and then he's down again. And I hate to see that happen to him because I think there's a lot of potential. And I think a lot of people they want to see if he can do this at the next level because he had so much criticism at Gonzaga. And I just don't know if he can do it at the next level. And I thought once he got with those NBA trainers that they were going to be able to beef him up, much like we saw from Giannis, even to an extent with Kevin Durant. He's not the same scrawny guy he was when he came into the league. He's got some muscle on him. He might not look it all the time, but, for his size, he's got plenty of muscle on there. Giannis was the one that grew a bunch. Shaq, when he first came into the league, he was a lot of muscle. I'll put that. He was a lot of muscle already, but he got beefier the longer he played in the league. And I think my hope is same thing happens with this Chet Holmgren because I think he's so good. And I think he's going to get overshadowed now because next season I think we're going to see the debut of two absolute giants in the league as Victor Wembanyama from France, I believe, is looking like the number one pick in the NBA draft this next time around. This dude is taller than Zach Edey out of Purdue or Iowa, one of those two. I can't remember now at the moment, who was listed at 7'4". This kid, he's only listed as 7'2", but he's taller than a guy that's 7'4". I think this kid, Victor Wembanyama, would make Yao Ming look small, height-wise. Yao Ming, broad dude. This is more tall and skinny. But Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren, the two bigs next season, is going to be fun. I hope they both get their chance to play. In other news from the NBA, we had a trade today. Patrick Beverley sent to the Lakers. I think that helps them. They need defense over there with a bunch of old guys. I mean, we saw the old guy experiment last year. It didn't work out. I hope they push away from that this season and try something else out. But moving Talon Horton-Tucker, who was unfortunately, one of their better scorers last year for a defensive guy, makes sense. They have plenty of offense with that team with LeBron and AD. There's been rumors that they might be looking to bring back Schroeder as well. So a lot of potential moves coming up. I'm sure we'll talk about it more in the next coming days. We're out of time. Kevin Durant staying with Brooklyn, so all that fun talk was meaningless. But I'll be back here on the show tomorrow, I believe, with Mike Wolfgang. Might see me again, though. Just me. But it's been fun. Power Hour coming up next on your sports network. As always, I'm Alec Burno. I'll see you next time.